everyone. Welcome back to Doodling Through Education. For my CC students, this is Cycle 3, Week 6, and this is a history video, which means we're going to be talking about the Louisiana Purchase. The Louisiana Purchase leads easily into talking about the Lewis and Clark Expedition, so we're going to talk about that as well in this video. Before we start, I wanted to remind you to subscribe to this channel so you never miss an episode from Doodling Through Education. So on that note, let's start doodling. Our story starts during the French and Indian War. The territory of the Louisiana Purchase was actually originally owned by France. In the French and Indian War, France surrendered a large part of Louisiana to Spain. This transaction did not affect the United States initially because they were still allowed to travel the Mississippi River and to use New Orleans as a trade port, which were both very important. Now, when Napoleon Bonaparte took control of France in 1799, he decided that he wanted to regain control over the lost territory in the New World. In 1802, King Charles IV of Spain returned the Louisiana Territory to France. This action created great unease in the United States at the time because it was thought that they would seek to dominate the region and then to take control of trade in the Gulf of Mexico through that port at New Orleans. Knowing this, Thomas Jefferson sent the future president, James Monroe, to help a man named Robert Livingston, who at the time was the U.S. minister in France, and he sent them to negotiate the purchase of New Orleans. In 1803, in the month of April, before Monroe even arrived, the French asked Livingston if the United States was interested in purchasing all of the Louisiana Territory. This was surprising, and Livingston did not expect this offer. It is not fully known why Napoleon Bonaparte offered this deal, but it is thought that it is perhaps due to the impending war with the British and financial strain due to this that he decided to offer the whole Louisiana Territory. In December of 1803, France transferred authority over the region to the United States. This transaction doubled the land size of the United States and included the whole region west of the Mississippi River and east of the Rocky Mountains. This deal included a whopping 828,000 square miles that the United States got for the deal of about $15 million. This purchase made a need to survey the lands that were just purchased. So, before the deal was even completed, Thomas Jefferson made a plea to Congress to finance an expedition to survey this new land. The man he appointed for the job was named Meriwether Lewis, who was Thomas Jefferson's personal secretary. To prepare for the trip, Lewis studied medicine, botany, astronomy, and zoology, and pored over existing maps and journals of the region. Lewis also asked his friend William Clark to come along and co-command the expedition. So they took on this task and began gathering supplies and weapons. They gathered many different things, some of which included surveying instruments, camping supplies, clothes, weapons, medicine, maps, and books spanning various topics. They also gathered many different gifts to use when trading and bartering with the Native Americans they were sure to meet along the way. They also had to recruit men for this job. They recruited 45 men in total. 27 of them were unmarried soldiers. They also brought a French Indian interpreter and contracted a boat crew to help them along the way. They left and headed upstream on the Missouri River on May 14, 1804. Surprisingly, only one person died during this expedition, and that happened that same year, 1804, on August 20th. He was a 22-year-old sergeant named Charles Floyd, and he died of an abdominal infection, which is thought today to probably be an appendicitis. Most of the land Lewis and Clark surveyed was already occupied by Native Americans, and they actually came into contact with about 50 different Native American tribes. They were able to barter goods and maintain peace with most of these tribes, but they did encounter the Teton Sioux in late September, and this particular tribe wasn't very accommodating. They actually attempted to stop the boats and even demanded a toll payment, but in the end, they were no match for the group's weapons and overall decided to move on. When they got to Fort Mandan in present-day North Dakota, they met a man who was a French-Canadian trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau and hired him as an interpreter. They allowed his pregnant Native American wife, Sacagawea, to join them on the expedition. Her skills as a translator were invaluable, as was her great knowledge of the difficult terrain. Sacagawea was actually pregnant when she joined the expedition and gave birth to her son during it as well. Perhaps most significant was her calming presence to both the expedition team and the Native Americans that they came across, who might have otherwise been hostile to the strangers. After crossing the Continental Divide, they finally reached the Pacific Ocean in November of 1805. After a long, hard winter in Oregon, they began their trip back home in March of 1806 and arrived in St. Louis in September of that year. They received a hero's welcome there, and they were able to later share invaluable information with Thomas Jefferson when they returned to Washington, D.C. that same fall. The group had traveled more than 8,000 miles and produced invaluable maps and geographical information. They identified at least 120 animal specimens and 200 botanical samples, and had initiated peaceful relationships with dozens of Native American tribes. So overall, the legacy of the Louisiana Purchase is that it paved the way for the expedition of Lewis and Clark, which then inspired many other Western pioneers. And that is all we have for today. Talk with your siblings and your parents about the Louisiana Purchase. You can also talk with them about the Lewis and Clark expedition. Talk about what you know and maybe research a little bit about the things that you don't know this week. Never stop learning. And on that note, remember to be kind, follow God's will, and take care. Bye.